Here's more of our end-of-the-year roundtable with CBN's Julie Stahl and John Waage. Welcome back to our Year in Review program. Julie, it's been just more than 1 year since the Abraham Accords. Now, you've been to the UAE, one of those countries that have normalized relations with Israel. What did you find there, and how have the Abraham Accords progressed this past year?
People there are super kind, and the ambassador from Israel to the UAE at the time told me that during Israel's war in Gaza in May, that the people there were very open. They wanted to know what Israel's side of the story was, and that's something that never had happened before. There was always just one side of the story, and that was what the Palestinians said. And this time they wanted to see what were the two sides, and that was really a test, I think, for Israel and the UAE and Bahrain and the different countries that signed with Israel, how they were going to respond when Israel had a conflict with the Palestinians. So they made it through, and I would say the relations grew closer. I think there was a good interchange between them, and I think it really seems to be genuine on both sides, I think. Someone told me recently that, they had always been meeting Israelis at like business conferences, international events, and they liked them, but they never could really have relationships with them. Now that's been opened up. Now the business ties are opened up. So, what maybe started as a common concern about Iran has really developed, I think, into a full relationship. Just one little anecdote, I've gotten to know the head of the Bahraini Journalists Association via Zoom, and she wrote to me at Hanukkah and wished me a really blessed Hanukkah and everything. And I thought, wow, this wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. She wouldn't have been allowed to, even if she wanted to, but just that we could develop a relationship. I know the Jewish communities in those places in Bahrain and also in the UAE are also growing and being able to be much more public about what they do, and I think it's really a good sign.
Yeah, and there's not only economic relations, but military relations growing. John, how would you assess how the Trump administration did with the Abraham Accords? And then the Biden administration seems to be taking a much different foreign policy role here in Israel and the entire Middle East. You already alluded to it, but what differences do you see between these two administrations?
First and foremost, I guess, is the stance on Iran and the fact that they want to go back to the JCPOA, the agreement with Iran, but also on the situation with the Palestinians. This is going to be a real test for those countries that Julie was just mentioning, those moderate Gulf states, because the Biden administration is trying to put forward the situation in Jerusalem. For now, it seems that the consulate in eastern Jerusalem is shut down for the time being, but we just don't know where they're going to go if they're going to try and put this whole thing front and center with the Israelis vis-a-vis the Palestinians and reviving the thought of a two-state solution, which has pretty much been dead in the water for years. So those actions are going to really put the pressure on this Israeli government that is such a disparate government, and it's going to pose challenges for sure, not to mention the threat of conflict on the northern border and within Israel from Hamas and other quarters.
John and Julie, one more question. What do you see for the coming year? I know that's a hard question here in the Middle East, but also how can people pray? John, first to you.
I just think that there's a bigger agenda going on, and it's one that comes from heaven. And I think the shaking is of the Lord, not necessarily all the attacks physically through a virus and all those kinds of things. But I think the Lord is allowing a shaking for a purpose, which is his plans and purposes for Israel, for the United States, and for nations across the globe. And so I really think that we're going to see more of that shaking, more intense shaking. And I guess in terms of praying for it, it's what Jesus taught us, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and just holding on to the fact that God is God in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, amen. Julie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with John that things are definitely, I don't see them calming down, unfortunately. I wish they would. But one way or the other, I think things are going to continue to shake. We may have ups and downs. It may get quiet for a little bit, but I think we're going to see maybe more military activity. Probably something will break one way or another with Iran in the coming year. We didn't really talk about tourism, but you know, the tourism, it's kind of like stopping, starting. I hope Israel is going to find a way to really open back up to tourism to Christians from around the world, because there's so many people that would like to come here and bless Israel, and they're also a spiritual comfort to Israel and a spiritual kind of backup to Israel. So in terms of praying, we could pray that Israel would find a way to reopen to the world, especially to Christians. Whatever we think about the leaders, that we could pray for them, that they would have wisdom way beyond anything that they can come up with on their own, and that God would really work in people's hearts and minds here.
John, Julie, thanks for joining me on this Year in Review program. And Jesus also said to watch and pray, and we'll be planning to watch, pray, and report on what's happening here in Israel and the Middle East in the year to come.